it was like probably the hardest conversation I've ever had in my life, because it was like, I need to tell you guys something and I don't want you guys to be mad, and like I just want to say this because I want to get better. And Mum's like, what's going on?
Chelsea Blissett, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you so much for making the drive down from Brisbane. We're here on the sunny Gold Coast and the sun's out. We have a beautiful morning.
I know, it was like I needed it. Day off, getting me down to the coast. Honestly, it's my favourite thing to do.
You've had such a busy week.
Yeah.
What, three games in the last
7
week?
days, yeah.
How are you feeling?
I'm exhausted emotionally, physically, but it was like, it's one of those weeks where they just chuck all the games 1 week just to get through 3 rounds. So it's that weird thing was like, it's the life of a professional athlete, unfortunately. Yeah. And like I played every minute. Yeah. So I was like walking and like limping off the plane yesterday because I got hit in the hip 3 times. And this, like every game I played, I got hit in the exact same spot. And I was like, by the end of it, I was like limping. I was like, I can't. I need
some
chill.
time.
I need rest.
I need some time. I remember like, because even when we were talking about teeing this up, you're like, yeah, love to just have to get through like this week because this week is so insane.
You're like, what's going on? I was like, yeah, I'm free after this week because I was like, it was like we played last week. So we played 1 game and then even then the turnaround was shorter. And then it was like Sunday play, Monday off. Then I went Tuesday -1 and it was like play and then day off and then we got on a plane and then we played again. And I was like, because I haven't really had like a big schedule like this for quite a while, I was like, didn't really know what to expect too much, like physically and mentally. And then because my parents were like visiting last week, so they got to come to all 4 games because it was like Melbourne, Brisbane, Melbourne. So they like came to all the games. And I like just once the last game finished, I like walked to my mum and dad and just like crumbled in their arms. I was like, I'm so tired.
Just need some love.
I need some love. I need some TLC.
Yeah.
So then you're like, come to the coast. I was like, I'm there, honestly.
And even like what you were saying today when we had coffee, you're like, oh, I bought my togs. Like I'm going to have a swim. Like the water's so crystal clean at the moment. Like it's probably such a nice place to be just to like decompress.
Oh, honestly, it's my favorite thing to do is just to drive down to the coast because like I'm not from somewhere that has like beaches. Like the closest thing you have to a beach is a weir.
Where are you from?
Aubury,
yeah. Gotcha.
Little country girl.
Beautiful.
So like being near the beach where it's like an hour to me is like driving the car is nothing because we used to do so much traveling to like different places for football growing up. So I was like an hour and like I'm an early bird, so I'll beat all the traffic. So if I can get down to the beach when I can, I'm like, sweet.
Yeah. What did growing up look like for you in Albury, in a little small country town? Like how did football make its way into your life?
So my dad played football when I was like really young. He's always was into like all types of sports for himself growing up. And I just remember like watching him play when I was younger. It's like a very vivid like memory of mine is like just being around my dad playing football. And I didn't really get into football though until later on, until I was around like 8 or 9. I did athletics for a long time from like 6 till 14. I did athletics. And I just kind of thought as like soccer as like a fun thing I'd do in winter because athletics ran in the summer. And then I was, I think, 9 turning 10, trialing for like an under 12 girls like rep team. And I was just doing it for experience. My mum and dad thought it would be good for me just to do it because like it was like over 3 days and I would be like getting to do stuff in like the summer for football. And then I ended up making the squad. And I was like so surprised. I was like, I'm like nearly 3 years younger than some of these girls. And like when I was trialing, I was only 9.
Wow.
Even though like the next year I would have been 10. But,
and especially at that age, like 3 years at that age is insane.
Well, a 9-year-old girl compared to an 11, 12-year-old girl is like a massive difference.
That's what I mean.
So I made the squad and kind of just was like, oh, actually I'm maybe not too bad at football. But athletics was still like my primary thing that I did, and I did like state athletics growing up, and I was like a 400-meter runner. And then I got to around 12, 13, and then it kind of became quite evident that I was a lot better at football than I was at athletics, even though like I probably could have continued at athletics for quite a while. But when I got to kind of like 12, it was kind of like, oh, I started making more than my local rep team. I started making like your like kind of like Riverina team, which is kind of like a couple of different, we called it like Riverina was like your Wagga, your Albury, your Griffith,
it's like represent,
and stuff.
like
like your representative football.
And was it tricky? Like, was it tricky to having to make a choice between the two? Because I imagine, like, growing up, there's like kids have to like they play a lot of sports, right?
Yeah.
Like, if we're privileged enough to get to play a lot of different sports, and it usually gets to the point where you have to make a choice, you know, because you're usually potentially better at one of them. How did you make the choice between soccer? Is it just because you were better at it, or is it just because you enjoyed it more?
I think I just loved it more. I think I am a very social person when I want to be. And there was no big like athletic training groups in Albury. There was none of that kind of stuff. So like when I was training for athletics, I was like training by myself always. But I just loved being around all my friends playing football, and I loved the kind of like traveling that we got to do, and I just fell in love with the sport so much growing up. And I think it was something that my dad and I did a lot of together.
Yeah.
And it just was, and like my dad was like my rep coach for pretty much my entire like representative career locally. And it was just something that we did together. And it just, I don't know, I loved athletics, but I like loved football, and I almost like loved knowing that I was good at it too. When I was younger, I was like, I am good, so I'm going to stick with this one.
But I think, excuse me, I think that's a thing though. Like when you have positive success in something at a young age, that kind of like almost fuels this little fire when I'm like, oh, I'm actually good at something. I can potentially like make a career out of this. Did you think that you were going to make a career out of it? Like, was that even like a thought you had back then? Because I like the professional sport in the like professional soccer space in the women's space probably wasn't a thing.
No, it wasn't really a thing back when I was growing up. I think I watched my first A-League women's game when I was, I think, 13 or 14, maybe 13, because we got invited to play Canberra in like this like trial game for like, I can't even remember what it was for. It's probably very irrelevant.
Yeah.
But afterwards we got invited to watch Canberra United versus Melbourne Victory in Canberra. And it was my first time ever seeing what it could look like, playing professionally, or even, I think it was even my first time realizing there was a professional women's league, if I'm being completely honest, because the Matildas weren't really a thing growing up. Yeah. Obviously, like at that point, I'm just playing for the enjoyment of the sport. And then I went and watched this game, and I was like I just remember vividly turning to my dad and being like, I am going to play professionally. And that was like it, full stop. And then that's how it kind of like really went full steam ahead for me, being like, I'm going to play professionally, football wise. And it was like such a crazy, like full circle moment, because at the exact same place I told my dad that I wanted to be a professional footballer, it was the exact same place I made my professional debut.
Oh, I just got goosebumps.
Yeah, it was insane. And like I didn't remember, but my dad did. It was like after my debut, and dad's like, do you remember what you said to me like when you were 12 here? And I was like, no. He goes, no, you said to me that you were going to play professional football, and you literally said it like right here at this place. And I was like, that was so scary. And then another than weird turn of events, I made my like return from my ACL at that exact same place this year, and I was like,
That's so weird. That is so weird. Run me through your debut, because obviously it's like any professional debut is so incredibly special, because it's not even just the fact of like you making the debut, it's like the last 10, 15 years of work. Like you worked so incredibly hard. Run me through that.
Yeah, I was playing NPL in Melbourne for South Melbourne. I was 17, turning 18. I was in year 12. I kind of like had it in my mind that I'll just finish off year 12 at a school that I got like a scholarship to like just for being a footballer. And I'll like work really hard, get like a decent ATAR, get into the course that I want to. I'll move home and then do my gap year in Albury, and then I'll move back to Melbourne for university. And like that was my whole entire plan. And then it was like the last month of like normal season, our club pulled me aside and was like, Melbourne City have asked for you to go on and trial. And I was like, Melbourne City? And they're like, yeah. And if anyone, like people that know about like the pinnacle of football, especially during that time, it was when all the Matildas played for Melbourne City. It was the biggest club. Still is, but it was the biggest club in Australia. And it wasn't overly known for giving younger footballers opportunity, like not to like be signed for them, but to play for them because of the caliber of players they had was unbelievable.
Right.
And they was like, they've asked you to trial. They've got 2 spots up for grabs. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, that's crazy. I'll go and do it. And it was like me and like 30 other girls.
Yeah.
So it was like the first time I've ever really like trialed in that kind of environment before ever.
Were you nervous?
Oh my gosh, I was so nervous.
Because it's like 30 other girls, you got 2 spots.
And yeah, we're just all sitting in one change room, and it was like before all the other girls was like come in, and it was like you trialed for like a week and then they culled a heap of people.
So each week they were culling
people, yeah.
Gotcha.
And it was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I was like asked to do it, to be honest, because I was like, I did. 1 minute I was like, I'm just going to move home, and the next minute I'm trialing, and then now I'm like, oh, I can see my dream like right in front of me. And then pretty much from there it was like week on week, like people either got asked to come back or they didn't get asked to come back. And then I made it to the stage where I got to actually start and play in a practice game. And I actually was like, I'm very self-critical, but I remember getting onto the front of my parents and being like, I crushed that. Like, I was so good.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Gotcha. So someone who's naturally like really self-critical, but you just knew that you killed it.
I just knew that I killed it that game.
Wow.
And then I was like to mum and dad, like, I feel like this is like my opportunity. But I remember like during the trial stage, I definitely wasn't the initial pick for the spot. And I knew that, and I could tell. And I remember I was on the phone to my dad, and I was like crying because I was like meant to be studying for all my exams. I wasn't. I was so tired. I was like traveling an hour to get to there, an hour to get home, training, not knowing if I was ever going to get a contract. And like honestly being like, what am I, like, I don't know what I'm doing. And my dad was like, school's always there, but this opportunity is not. And so you just got to keep going and keep showing like what you're made of. And I was like, no, like you're right. And like I think 2 weeks before the season started, my coach pulled me aside, Rado, who was my coach for like 5 years, and he will always probably be one of the most influential people in my football career. He was like, we're going to give you the contract and you're going to start round 1. And I was like, because Steph was injured. And I was like,
Steph Catley?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because Steph was injured. And I was like, oh my God, are you joking? And he's like, no, I don't joke about stuff like that. And I was like, and he like turned around and was like, good job. Like, you know, I'm proud of you and all this stuff. And I remember our manager pulled me aside because she obviously and she's like, do you want to just walk for a second? I was like, yeah, I just need a second, because I was like about to cry, because like the 1.5, 2 years leading up to that moment was probably like the hardest 2.5, like 1.5, 2 years like of my life up until that point. And so like getting that, or like knowing that at the end of the day, it was like everything was like worth it, moving away from home, adjusting like mine and my family's life, like for it was honestly like the biggest achievement of my life. And I still think it is, because it's allowed me to get to where I am today and to have the little platform that I do have.
I do want to talk about the 2 years prior, but before I do, who was the first call that you made after you got told that you had the contract?
Oh, my mum and my dad.
Yeah.
I was like on the phone to them, and I was like, you would not believe what's just happened. And they're like, what? And I was like, I got the contract. Yeah. I was like, I'm going to be like a professional footballer. And I think my mum could tell that I was getting like very excited, but you also knew that I still had gym. I still had like other things to do that day.
Yeah.
But I was getting like so overly like emotional. And my mum was like, we can cry about it later, but like I know that you still have things to do today.
Wow.
And I was like, no, you're right. But no, it was like they were the first 2 people that I called, because they've been like the biggest support in my life from like the get-go, and they let me move away from home at 16 like by myself and like help support me just so I could achieve my dream. Like, and they got heavily criticized for that as well, like by just like not like random people, but like you know, there would be people being like, oh, so you let Chelsea leave at 16, like all this stuff. And mum's like, yeah, like Albury is it's big enough to obviously be like more of like an inland city. You know, you could have a creek and have a life. Like, it's a beautiful little town, and I love going home, and it held such a special place in my heart. But mum's like, at that time as well, mum was like, you're too big. Like, you're too big for this town, and like you might not see it now, but your dad and I see it, and you've got dreams and ambitions and like this big personality that's not meant to be for here. And I didn't quite understand that at that time, because I'm like, oh, but Albury is like, it's like great. I love it. But I think I understand what she means now. Like, when I go home, like I love it so much, but it's like, it's not here. It's not like living in Melbourne. It's not Sydney. And I think I've become so accustomed to that like, it's just not who I am. It's like always going to hold a special place in my heart. But the only reason that it is kind of home is because my family is there.
Yeah, and I think that's and they probably wouldn't have let you leave if they didn't think you were capable of doing it.
No, my mum is the most brutally honest person in my life.
Yeah.
And I feel like if I really did suck, I think she'd be like, if I was like, Mum, I want to move away from home for football, she'd be like, yep, and I'm a unicorn. So like, here we are.
Yeah.
Like, she's that kind of person. So
your parents sound so incredible, like just so awesome, and just know like the right things to say at the right times. Like you talk about having these incredible people around you. You also talked about your coach being incredibly inspirational and pivotal in the 5 years that you've been coached by him. What is it about it? Like, what is it about him that has helped you for so long, or has helped you so much?
Because I think he really saw me as a person. And can sometimes be really hard to find a coach that thinks of you more as a person than just a footballer or someone on their team. Like, he would always ask me how my family is. He would always even ask me how I am. In the off seasons, he would ring me to see how I'm going. He, you know, was a big supporter of me when, you know, I was coming back from my ACL. It was like, even when I was struggling coming back from my first knee, he was even like, if you feel like you need to get out of your contract and move back to Brisbane, like, just to feel more comfortable, like, I'm willing to make that happen for you. Like, he just always made me feel like he cared, and he was always would act like a little grandpa kind of thing. And he was like that with everyone. It wasn't just with me. Like, he loved everyone that he coached, and he really tried hard to make it such a family environment that, you know, that's what made him special, and that's what made, I think, my time at City special, and why, you know, leaving there was actually so hard for me, because he, you know, and then when his son Dario took over, it was the exact same thing because of just who they are as people, and they're the most amazing people that I have ever met. And like, I think they are the reason why my time there was so special and why I loved the club so much.
I think there's something in that, especially around like really good coaches. And I can only speak from like the NRL and rugby league space. And even just talking to other players, it's like the coaches that really genuinely care about their players and who have that more like personal component to them, or they're the component component of like their coaching, they're the ones who usually get the best out of players, or they're the coaches that the players want to play for more. I see it all the time with like Craig Bellamy, Wayne Bennett, Trent Robinson, who you probably would have no idea who these guys are.
I actually do, so I feel quite special that I know who they
but
are.
You got the rugby league, but it was but these guys like and I'll talk to guys in the other teams, and they will go over and above for these coaches, because same thing, they'll check in on them. It's like while they're incredible like X's and O's coaches, of course, their personality and they're willing to invest in players is incredible, and that's how you get the best out of players. I think.
And I think it's awesome that our coach now here at Brisbane Roar, Alex, he's actually been a part of like we figured it out. He's been a part of like pretty much every year, other than like maybe like a year and a half of my whole entire football career, because he was Rado's assistant coach for a while, and like, so he also was at City, so he also has that same mentality as well. So that's why I love playing for him as well. And I think like these are the type of coaches that are the ones that are going to get the best out of the girls. So it's like, I've been very blessed with the kind of people that I have had throughout like my professional career as like coaching as well.
Did that make the transition over to Brisbane easier?
Well, he actually wasn't coaching us at the time when I did move to Brisbane. We had a coach, and then I think round 5 of last year he got sacked, and then Alex came in.
Gotcha.
And I was like so stoked. I was so excited. I was like, oh my gosh, Alex, like, yes. And then his first game, I tore my second ACL, and I was like, this is the worst. But nah, he's like, we've had such a like great start to the year this year, and our team is unbelievable, and the vibe is like insane. Like he somehow managed to put a group of like girls together that actually all like each other, and like, I don't want to be stereotypical about girls, but at the end of the day, when there's so many different personalities, it can get a bit like either like cliquey or, you know, the team just doesn't like gel properly. And I've never been in a team where everyone's like, oh, I'll see you every day, but you want to go hang out on our off day? Like, do you want to go do something? Like, so that stuff is like pretty cool as well. It's really special.
Yeah, I think, well, they're like the most successful teams, right? When everyone gets on, and like, I couldn't imagine trying to navigate the female space with like I just think it would be so wild. I see it in like the AFLW space and the NRLW space, and like the teams who kill it, they usually get on really well off the field. Like they'll have like their Big Mad Mondays, or they'll like go on like away trips outside. You can see it. Like you can see, you obviously see it in the boy space, but the girl space I imagine would be tricky to manage if you were a coach or a team manager. You touched on your second ACL before. You're back playing.
Yes.
How are you feeling? Like you said, even beforehand, you said, I played like almost every single minute in the last week. So how are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. This is my second one. So I did my first one in the preseason of the 2020-2021 season. And it was like 2 weeks into preseason. I was like flying. I was loving it. I'd just come back from living in Brisbane because I decided to move up here because of COVID. My uncle lived in Shorncliffe, so he was like, if you ever want to move to Brisbane, I was like, well, now's better than anything.
I'm coming.
Yeah. So I ended up like playing up here out of like a local NPL team and honestly fell in love with Brisbane.
Yeah.
Because I'd never really, like, I think the last time I was in Brisbane, I was like on a holiday when I was like 15.
Yeah.
And like fell in love with it, fell in love with the people, fell in love with the club that I was at. And then I was like, oh, well, now I've got to go back down to Melbourne for pre-season, starting back up again. Got back down there, like, you know, was flying 2 weeks in, just in like a passing pattern, just twisted the wrong way on my knee, and like it like kind of popped underneath me. And like that for me was like, I was devastated in that like moment because I was like, oh, I've done like all this hard work in the off season, because I actually had a knee surgery during the time that COVID hit because I tore my meniscus overseas in an under-20s like Oz competition. And so I'd like come back from that, was playing really good football. I was like, everything's sweet. Went and tore my ACL. And I just remember it was like probably my first major injury where I was like, oh, I'm actually not going to be able to play football for like a very long time.
Did you grasp that reality? Because I know a lot of people who have had an ACL, they don't know how much effort it does take to come back, because it is like it's a lot. It's a lot. Did you grasp the reality of it?
I think in the female space we grasp it a little bit quicker because it happens very often.
Gotcha.
So even though it was probably my first real big injury with like in regards to being out for a long time, I reckon I could have counted like 5 to 7 people that I knew that had already done their ACLs, that I've watched them come back from their rehab, especially when I was doing like Future Matildas and all that kind of like youth football stuff in like the national team space. And like, so I've seen it happen so often. And like by the time I did one of my friends had done 2. So it was like, I think I thought I knew what it was, but I think until like you're in the depths of it, it's very like difficult. I kind of like smashed out my rehab. Like physically, I was like, sweet. I love the gym. So being in the gym's not an issue for me. I love training. I love all that kind of stuff. So doing the steps of like the rehab wasn't hard. It was like the mental toll after I came back. I was so hard on myself playing, had no confidence, really like got into quite a negative headspace of like every time I touched the ball, it was like negative self-talk. Every time I played a game, I could never walk off the field happy. Like it was my my first start of the year, and I think maybe because I came back in round 5, so I think I had my first start in round like 8 or 9, and I played like okay. My mum might say different, but like I played like okay, and I remember walking off the field and just being like an absolute sourpuss, and my mum like was like, you literally just played your first 60 minutes for like a year, and you're walking off the field like someone, you know, just told you like the worst news on the planet. Like she goes, that doesn't seem right to me. Like that doesn't comprehend. Like, yeah, you need time to get back to feeling like who you were, and you just had the perfect opportunity to start a building block, and you're angry, like you're upset, like you could visibly see it on your face that you were not happy.
Is it because you just have the expectation that you were just going to go back to play how you were previously playing?
Yeah, I just had like this at the time, realizing now, it was very unrealistic. Like this unrealistic expectation that I was just going to hop on the field and everything was going to be like happy daisy and just the way it was. And it just kind of got like spiraled from there. And then I'd always seen a psychologist, but then I started to see a specific sports psychologist through the PFA. And by the end of that season, it was a completely different Chelsea. It was like...
How so?
I just stopped putting so much pressure on myself. I started to actually enjoy being at training again. Kind of just like became more myself. Like I definitely wasn't myself. I definitely, you know, like at times wanted to quit. I was like on the phone to my mum being like, I don't want to be here. This sucks. Like I'm in Melbourne. I'm like away from you. I'm away from like my partner at the time. Like this is a joke. Like I don't want to do this. Like I'm not starting. I'm playing like the worst football I reckon I've ever played. Like I think this is not for me. And my mum was like, no, I'm not hearing it. I'm like, whatever.
Yeah.
My dad was also the same. He's like, Chelsea, like it's a process. Like it is a massive process. And at the time I was only 21, and they were like, you'll get there. And then by the end of the season, I did like a lot of work on how do I react to mistakes? How do I think about mistakes? How do I think about failure? How do I think about, you know, like growing as like a player? And by the end of the season, I was a completely different person, like on and off the field. And I think that like had a lot to do with just me changing the way that I think. And then from there kind of like was like really like building. And then I got to like the end of my 5th year at City, and I was really missing it up here. I was really sick of packing my car up every 6 months and like moving. And I just got to the point where I was like, I think I want to be, like, I think I just want a bit of stability in my life. I've been moving around since I was 16 years old. And I think that's the part that a lot of people maybe don't understand, is that, yes, we have to move around and be adaptive for professional sports. Like, you know, you might be living here, now you got to pack up and play there, and you got to do all that. But I'd been doing that since I was 16. Like since I was 16, I think I moved around from 16 till 19. I wasn't in a place longer than 12 months.
Wow.
And then from 19 till 23, I didn't live anywhere longer than 7 months.
That's incredible.
So I was like, I want to be where at the moment I feel like my support system is and I'm the most happiest, and that is in Brisbane. So then I was like, got a mutual termination of my contract, and the club was great with that, and I couldn't have asked them to be any better. And like it was very sad to leave, and it was a hard decision, but I was like, I think I need to do what's best for me right now. And so then I decided to move up to the Roar and play up here, and the fans up here are unbelievable. It's insane. Like they get around female football so much, and it's so great to see. And then like started off with a bang, loved it, loved the team, got into round 6 and then just tore my second ACL. And I was devastated because I could just almost like see the year that I could have had just gone. And I think like the first ACL like crushed me, but this one really was like the point where I was like, I never thought about quitting football, like, again, really, since that first ACL. And I only knew that I wanted to quit because it just was, like, not in a great mental space. I was in a great mental space when I did my second one and, you know, really, like, loving life, loving football, loving where I was at. And then I was just like, oh, I don't know if I can do this again.
Where did your head go? Tell me, like, the internal dialogue that you have on the second one.
I actually vividly remember just lying on the ground being like, I was like saying it to our physio. I was like, I'm not doing this again. I know exactly what it is. I know exactly what I've just done. I'm in so much pain. I can't do this again. I'm not doing it. And I think it took me maybe like 2 weeks to figure out what I actually wanted to do because I was like, I could just go and finish off my uni degree and move on with my life and, you know, because I think the hard part about being like a female professional athlete is the fact that it's like our league isn't full time. I'm not going to get paid in the off season. I am not going to be able to kind of live properly off this money now for 12 months. Not going to have quite the rehab support in the off season that I would have in season. Everything changes because we're not full-time professionals, even though that we are technically full-time professionals with the way that we have to like treat our lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I was like, do I just, you know, take this as a sign, adios, see you later. Like I've loved the career that I've had. I'm in the best place like that I could be when it comes to like support and like living and whatever, and then just like give it up. And then I think a part of me was like, we don't quit. Like, we don't do that.
Is that the conversation? Did you have that conversation with yourself or was it with your mum and dad? Did the sports psych come back into the mix? Like, how did you navigate the internal dialogue to stay in it?
I spoke to my mum and dad and I spoke to my boyfriend at the time and was like talking to them a lot about it. And I think they allowed me to vent and didn't really say too much, but they allowed me to kind of come to the conclusion to myself because I think that they knew who I was.
Yeah.
That I think that they knew that I was kind of maybe going to be a bit on like that negative side to begin with. But they also all know that I've like, don't quit. I don't give up. I work ridiculously hard. And I think when it was like got to the point where like to make it the decision really to like, am I gonna just rehab and then stop or am I gonna rehab and keep going? I think it was like I'd almost talked myself into a good mindset by talking it quite negatively to begin with.
Do you think if your parents or your ex-partner or your partner at the time, do you think if they pushed on you like, no, you're fine, keep going, like you'll do it, you'll be fine, do you think you would have pushed back a little bit? Like, did you need to find that conclusion yourself?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I was like that type of person that's like, I'm about to do the dishes, but if you tell me to do the dishes, now I'm not going to want to do the dishes.
Yeah, I get you.
That's the kind of person that I am. I was like, sometimes I just got to come to a conclusion by myself. And I definitely think that the people around me knew me well enough to know that. And they also knew how much I love the sport and how much I love being a footballer. And so I think they knew that I was going to come to that conclusion by myself. And I'm like so glad that I did because soon I smashed my rehab out in 9 months, which, you know, for females, I normally like to keep you at 12. And I was like, nah, I'm playing round one. I don't care what anyone says. I am on that pitch round one and I will be there. And I made sure that I did a lot more mental work on the second one just to make sure that I was like, didn't have unrealistic expectations. I didn't have, you know, that fear of like having to push myself too much or be like, if, you know, it doesn't feel 100% straight away, like it's actually okay and it's a part of like the process.
I was going to say, what are the biggest learnings that you took from the first ACL that you took into the second ACL?
It definitely was like the process. Like I think I was so set on looking so far ahead that I didn't bother just to like go through the little things, like work on the little things like throughout. So I was a lot more process focused. I was a lot less like, I must tick this off. I must just tick this off. Like I must be running at 3 months. I must be kicking the ball at 4 months. I must be able to do this. Like I stopped putting all of that pressure on myself. And then when I did get back on the ball, I was like, just enjoy it. Like you haven't done this now for ages. Like just enjoy being back in it. And then I took that same mentality when I went back into like team training and back into preseason. I was like, you know, you've done a lot of one-on-one work, you've done a lot of technical work, you haven't done a lot of teamwork. So it might just feel a little bit odd and uncomfortable. But this time around, it just felt so natural. Like it just felt like I was like meant to be back on the pitch. It felt like I was meant to be there day one of preseason. And the group of girls that we had brought in were unbelievable. And like some of these girls only knew me for maybe a month and they were so supportive and they were so like, like seeing me back and watching me play, and you know, they were unbelievable. And then the girls that have been with me through the whole 12-month journey, and I was very lucky to actually have a rehab partner in one of our younger players, Grace. She did her ACL in the week of round 2. I did mine the week of round 6, so we were very close together. And we just really lent on each other and we became each other's support system, and we pretty much got to play our first games back on the same day.
That's cool.
Got to like experience it together. And I do think that having someone else to kind of like see it almost as like someone else is going through the exact same thing as you.
Yeah.
So you get to kind of have that perspective of it's like you're not in your own little world. You're not kind of feeling quite isolated. You're like, someone is going through the exact same thing as I am, and we got to be like strong for each other, and we got to just push each other in the best way that we can.
I remember when we first caught up, would have been like, what, almost a year ago maybe. And I remember you were talking to me about it, and you were saying in your first ACL, you put so much emphasis, and tell me if I'm wrong, but you put so much emphasis on the gym and the rehab, but you weren't really, it was almost like that was the priority, and then like being on ball was second.
Yeah.
And I think when you came out of it, you were like, oh, well, a huge learning is like trying to be back on ball, because that's like the skill level is such a huge part of it. Is that, and now you're back playing, you know, you're playing 3 games in a week, you're doing the whole thing. Do you think that helped?
I do think that helped, because I just feel like I had more of like a cohesive rehab. I think that I was so like, I just got to get so strong in the gym, and I just got to, you know, really like push myself, and I got to tick all the boxes, because obviously the gym's like the most important, like one of the most important aspects of coming back from like a knee injury, because you got to like, get so strong. But I almost then forgot that I was a footballer. So it was like a very weird thing. I was like, oh, I actually got to play. I actually got to do all these other things with the ball. And like I did a lot with the ball, like towards the back end of my first one. But I was so on the emphasis of like running and gym and like just like ticking boxes and getting back, that I was like, no, well, I actually play. Like I actually do things with my feet. Like I actually have to get like that ball control and that feel on the ball. So as soon as I could be back on the ball, I was doing ball work pretty much like straight away, just like little like 30-minute blocks, and then building building the intensity, and then making sure that when I was doing more conditioning, I was doing conditioning with the ball. I was doing like those other like little things that I just think that I like neglected in my first rehab, because I just wasn't quite too sure on like what I should be doing. And because I did do it kind of like my first rehab a little bit by myself, I didn't do it in Melbourne. So I didn't do it with like the club. I did it and like the external thing. So I wasn't really around a club environment. Whereas this time I was lucky enough to be able to just to train on with the QAS girl. So I was like in a team environment a lot earlier and doing team stuff a lot earlier, which then allowed me, I think, to just feel so comfortable coming back. Whereas when I went back into my first training session at City, it was like pretty much my first training session in 10, 11 months. Like in a team environment. So then it was like very difficult, I think. And then I think this time around, I think I set myself up really well, because as soon as I stepped back onto the pitch, it was like nothing.
I feel like just listening to your story, it's just a story of resilience, right? Like you've been constantly tested, and while you do have self-doubt, because we'll all have these thoughts, right? No matter what it's going to be. But the fact that you've been in it, you're aware of the fact that you're in it, and then you overcome it, I think that's so huge, and it's such a great learning for anyone who's listening. I think the big reason when we did caught up, a year ago or so, it was just like a big part of that was like the challenges that you've overcome, and a big one was around like eating.
Yeah,
you know, and that's why I think I've got a lot of respect for you, because you're so you're open to talking about it, and you're obviously super influential in like the female soccer space. And so you're willing to have these conversations and you're willing to speak up about your own experiences, which I respect hugely. In terms of your eating disorder and your experiences with eating, where do you think your story began? Where does this start?
It definitely began when I was like younger. Like I definitely look back and go, when I was even like 14, 15, I was so self-conscious of like my body. I was very hyper aware. I remember that like this moment used to seem so insignificant, but like looking back, it is very significant. Like I remember I was like, well, up here on a holiday and I was like, I really wanted to buy a new bikini. And I was like, you know, you get to go to all the cool surf shops because Albury at the time didn't have any of the cool surf shops. And I just remember I was like trying on these bikinis and my mum and I got into a fight because I was like, no, I hate that. I hate that. I hate that. Like, I don't want to, I actually said to my mum, I don't want to be in here trying on these bathers anymore. I don't want to do it. And mum was like, you're being ridiculous. And I was like, no, I don't want to look at myself in this mirror. I don't feel comfortable as like a 15-year-old. And I was like, I don't want to do it. And mum's like, you're just being, like at the time, mum's like, you're just being so difficult. And I was like, well, it's how I feel. And she's like, all right, fine. Let's leave the store then. And looking back on that moment, it had nothing to do with any of that. It just had everything to do with how I felt about myself and my body and just being hyper aware and just being like really judgy, like really, really judgy on myself.
What do you mean? You say like hyper aware of how you look? Like
how I looked.
What do you think? Like what's the thoughts?
Like just how I looked, feeling maybe like too big, like those kind of like thoughts and like that kind of like thought process was like, I feel too big. I don't feel confident. I don't feel comfortable. I just feel really like anxious looking at myself in this mirror. I don't want to be in front of the mirror. Like we're starting to develop really like conscious thoughts around food. Like I'd still like eat normally and regularly, but just being like, oh, this isn't very healthy. Like this is fried food. Like I know we're on holiday and we should be enjoying ourselves, but I always had like a big appetite as well. Like I've always just been able to like eat, which is like a good thing as an athlete. But then it being like, yeah, just very like, just I saw things in a different light than what I think I should have been seeing, especially around the thoughts of food and around the thoughts of exercise and around like kind of body image. But it kind of like ebbed and flowed very sporadically. Like it began with like, I could feel it very heavily one moment and then I wouldn't feel it again for another like 6 to 12 months. When I moved away from home though, it kind of became like more regular. It was...
You're living with a family friend?
We were living, at the time I was living with a family friend or like a homestay. And that's kind of where it really kind of started to kick off a little bit. But I developed quite bad anxiety when I lived away from home. Like I was very anxious and started having panic attacks and started kind of really like not understanding like what was going on. And I would like struggle to breathe. I felt like I probably wasn't pushing myself properly. Like I moved away from home for football and I hate to say this because it's like not who I am now, but I think it was a massive learning experience for me. But like I couldn't have cared less at some points. Like I was like, I've got a great group of friends. I'm living with my best friend. Like we want to go to the movies. We want to hang out. Like I don't reckon I touched the ball outside of school training or outside of like soccer training or like for, I reckon 6 to 8 months just because at the time I was just like in my own little oblivious little land. I was enjoying like life outside of school, had a good group of friends, and I just really like let that mindset of like I'm here to pursue something like slip completely. And my parents knew that. And we got into a couple like mum's like, if you don't want to be there for football, you need to come home. And I was like, no, I want to be there. I want to be there. And mum's like, yeah, attitude right now is not telling me that you want to be there. And then it just kind of like from there kind of started to like to go into more like just became really anxious. And then I was almost like, oh, I'm not doing what I'm meant to be doing. Now I've seen all my friends start to like sign for clubs and everything. And I was like, oh my God, like what is going on? And then I went home for school holidays And that's kind of when it really started for me, because I started now being hypercritical about what I was eating and how much I was exercising. And
because she wanted to be a better athlete?
yeah, because I wanted to be a better athlete.
That was the thought process at the start?
Yeah. And it was like, I wanted to be a better athlete. In like all honesty, I was like, I wanted to lose weight. I wanted to be fit. I wanted to be like the pinnacle of what an athlete looks like. And at the time, I initially thought if I lost all this weight, if I got really fit and healthy, it's going to put me in a better position to be able to get to where I want to go.
Yeah.
And I don't think the anxiety helped, because I think the anxiousness that I was feeling festered itself into an eating disorder, if I'm being like completely honest, because that's how I would get a sense of control from my anxiety, is because that's what I chose to control, was my food.
Yeah.
And I got home and I'd never really experienced anything in regards to like wanting to restrict, or I had bulimia. So for me, it was like the binging and the purging. And I'd never kind of experienced that before. And then I just remember one day I was like, went for a run, come home, and then had a muesli bar. And then it was like this little voice in the head was just popped up and was like, I don't think we should have eaten that muesli bar. And I was like, yeah, well, just run. Like, it's whatever. And then the intense kind of thoughts became very like amplified and just kind of like very intense and in my head. And like, and then I was like, oh my gosh, like I've never felt this before. And then it was like, you know how to, you know what you could do to help ease this feeling. And it was like kind of like the binging and the purging. And I like tried, couldn't do it. And I was like, but I was home by myself and I was like crying and I was like, I'm never going to do that again. And I was so silly. I can't believe I tried that. And it was like so out of character for me. And I was like, I'm never going to do it again. And the next day, the same thing happened. And then it kind of did happen. And then it just became kind of like something that happened once every however many, like it came like maybe like once a month kind of thing, where it was just happened when I felt really, really anxious. I had like a binging and purging cycle. And then I probably only did it twice when I was at home for the school holidays. And then when I moved back to Sydney for school, the more school amped up and the more football amped up, the more anxious that I got. And then the more anxious that I got, the more it happened. And it became like once a week to like once every day to 2 times a day to 3 times a day, to the point where like I really wasn't keeping any of my meals down. And I was like, knew that I wasn't healthy. Like I knew what I was doing was wrong. And I think that's the hard part about people that do suffer with eating disorders, is like, we're not sitting there going like, yep, this is right. We know what we're doing is like super healthy and super fine. But we're also not, we can't look at ourselves in a mirror and we can't see what we're doing is really like harmful and hurtful, and the way that we look and the way that we're kind of like now portraying ourselves, because it becomes quite isolating and it becomes quite a secluded time like to be in, because it kind of like tells you that, you know, it's helping you, and everything else is like, you know, trying to stop you from like being like the best that you can be. And, you know, you can be like this way and you're in control of your life and you think that you're in control, but you're very much not in control.
Did you know anyone else that had been through a similar situation?
No, it was very isolating. And I think the thing is I actually didn't get to speak to anyone that had gone through an eating disorder, I reckon, until 4 years into my recovery.
Gotcha. Really? So at what point did you recognize that I need to start making some changes? Or I know that this is unhealthy, I'm continuing doing it, but how do I don't know, navigate out of this? Like, what was there a point? Was there a standout moment at all?
There was a point, but it was not really like it wasn't like my call, because I got caught at a friend's house. Like the people that I was living with the year before, my best friend at the time and her family, they moved back down to the South Coast. And I was living with the new host family, and it was her birthday, so I took the train down and I slept over at her house. And because then it was a new situation for me. I wasn't in control. I wasn't, controlling my food. I had like an episode at her house, and her mum heard me in like the bathroom, and she kind of like sat me down because I saw that I'd like lost a lot of weight at that time too. And I was very like not quite the Chelsea that they like remembered. And I remember she sat me down, and because she was like my mum at the time as well, because I'd lived with her for a year, we were practically family. And she sat me down and was like, Chels, if you don't tell your parents, I'm telling them, because this is not okay.
Well, she obviously cared about you so much, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's why.
And I'm glad that she actually gave me the option to do it myself, because it kind of forced me to really confront what was happening. Like, it wasn't just like she went and told mum and dad and then I could be like, oh yeah, it's like whatever. Like,
how did you go navigating the conversations with your parents? Because obviously the first time telling them.
yeah, it was hard because I had to do it over the phone.
Yeah.
Because I was like, obviously away at school and they were back home, and I was like on FaceTime with them, and it was like probably the hardest conversation I've ever had in my life, because it was like, had to like get mum and dad in the same room and just be like, I need to tell you guys something, and I don't want you guys to be mad, and like I just want to say this because I want to get better. And mum's like, what's going on? Like, what? Because like all they knew at that time was I was exercising a lot to get fit for football. I was eating really well for football. I was doing all these things for football, and which at the time was helping my football. So it was a weird catch-22, because at that time I wasn't probably at the sickest that I was either.
Yeah.
And I was like, I have been like binging and purging my food and have kind of not been eating as well. And my mum and dad were just like in shock, a little bit of hurt, I think, because what are they meant to do? They're 7 hours away. They're, they've trusted me to kind of like take care of myself. They've put like that faith in me to be able to do that as well. And I've just like broken their trust, and, we've kind of like, it kind of did put a fracture in our relationship a little bit, like not in a way where it's like they would never support me or never that, but it took me a very long time to earn their trust and earn their faith in me back, that I can do this like journey by myself, or like just with the support of them. And like it didn't go great the first time that we spoke about it. There was a lot of like back and forth, and a lot of them not understanding the illness, me not understanding the illness, a lot of pre-assumptions as well. But by the end of the phone call, my mum sat there and we're like, we'll get through this together. We're a team. We'll come up. It was like nearly school holidays at that time too. She goes, we'll come up. We'll figure this out together. So mum and dad picked me up. I was still living in Sydney at the time. Took me home for school holidays and kind of like went and saw a doctor. We went and spoke to someone.
You all sit down together?
Yeah.
Yeah, just like a GP?
Yeah, just a GP at the time. And she kind of like walked us through the processes that we could like take. And my mum kind of like looked at the GP and goes, should we move her home? Like, should we like have her come home? And the GP was like, it's up to you. It's up to you how you feel. Like, she's obviously come to you wanting help. She wants to take that step. So it's whether or not you all feel comfortable as a family. And I had the option to go trial down at South Melbourne at that time. And I was very content with moving home. I said to mum and dad, I want to take care of myself. I want to be around you guys. I want to be around family.
Yeah.
I really want to make sure that I'm getting like taking care of myself, because I don't want to keep going through this. And my mum kind of looked at me and was like, so you're willing to chuck football away. Like, you're willing to not play football anymore. And I was like, I'm fine. Like, if I have to do it, I have to do it.
Yeah.
Because at that point, I kind of thought I'm not going to really make it.
Yeah.
I'd seen, like, my friends make under 17s, I was squads. I saw my friends, you know, sign for A-League teams. Kind of also got told that I probably wouldn't be good enough as well at the time. And I was like, I'm quite happy and content to moving home. I gave it a crack. It is what it is. I'm not really in love with football anymore. And my mum, being my mum, was like, I think it's a lie.
Yeah.
I was like, bullshit.
She's smart. She gets it.
She's smart.
She knows
gets
you.
it.
Yeah.
And because my dad was actually quite happy and on board for me to move home. Dad's like, if that's what you want, that's what you're going to do. And my mum was like, why don't you just go down to South Melbourne, train with the girls, and if you don't like it, you come home. If you do like it, we'll figure it out. And, like, went down, trialed, loved it, and then ended up saying to mum and dad, I think I want to move down to Melbourne and play down in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And then we got in contact with the Royal Children's, who then hooked me up with a psychologist and nutritionist outpatient. Because if I went inpatient, I actually would have had to, like, drop out of school and, like, move into, like, the facility. And they said that because I was so willing to get help that I wasn't quite at that stage where I needed inpatient care.
Yeah.
So then we ended up doing that, and I ended up moving down to Melbourne by myself. And, you know, but my parents drove to Melbourne twice a week to come and we all did group therapy together.
That's so awesome.
Like, and I think that was the best part, was I didn't quite understand what was going on with me. They definitely didn't understand what was going on the kind of like how the illness worked. And by the time we all kind of had our second family session, like, the whole opinion of the situation had changed. My mum was like, I never thought of it that way. I had my preconceived notions. Obviously, the way that it can be portrayed on media is something that's very vain, and, you know, people do it because they want to be skinny, or that's what girls do when they want to, like, lose a couple of kilos real quick.
What was the biggest learning for your parents? What was there something that they took out of it? Because you said it was a learning piece, an educational piece for everyone.
Yeah.
What do you think was the biggest learning piece that they took out of it?
I think the biggest piece that my parents took out of it was that though it kind of covers itself as, you know, about, like, body and just, like, wanting to be skinny and wanting to be that. And I think that's the biggest thing that I'm trying to get out of it, is that, yes, it comes across that way. And that's how that's how in my head it kind of did start. But it's about control. It's about, you know, it's almost like a coping mechanism for something else. So for me, my anxiety was so bad that I coped with it through food, that I controlled it through food, and then that's how it controls you, and it isolates you, and it makes you, like, want to do all these things because it thinks that it's helping you, and it disguises itself in a way that's, like, very, you know, people think it's, like, normal, because it's like, if you lose a couple of kilos, everyone's like, oh my God, you're doing amazing. Yes. Like, you look great. Like, it's everything. And then it doesn't, like, kind of show you that you're constantly anxious about eating. You're constantly anxious about hanging out with friends. Like, you know, your mind turns into, like, this different machine, and you turn into a completely different person.
And your mind is constantly playing tricks on you.
All the time.
All the time. And I think this is why I was so curious and interested to have this conversation with you, because you've been through it. And I know it's so prevalent in society and community, especially with the rise of social media.
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with a friend who's in the mental health ward in a hospital. And because stereotypically we think it's just females. But she's like, recently, probably in the last couple of years, it's almost just as many males as it is females.
Yeah.
And so I think this is such a great educational piece. And I think that I'm really curious about as well is, like, you asked for help, and I imagine it's probably it might be tricky for a lot of people to ask for help, because it's an education. They don't even probably think they might have something wrong with them. What do you think is a great bit of advice or something that helped you to want to ask for help? Or, like, is there any advice that you think you could pass on to anyone who, like, because it would be tricky having, like,
so
hard conversation with your parents, sitting out and having to call them. Like, is there anything that stands out?
I think for me it was, I think at the time I didn't know how bad it was. And I think that when I was really confronted by everything, like confronted with it being like, no, this is wrong, Chelsea, you need to tell your parents, like, this isn't okay, like, it's unhealthy. It almost like kind of snapped me back into my actual reality. Like, I was living in my own reality where I was doing the right thing. It was it was disguised as like, I'm trying to really like get better for football. I want to be fit. I want to be healthy. I want to feel confident in myself. I want to, do all these things. And that was my reality because that was the reality that my disorder morphed it to be.
Yeah.
And that was how I thought that my life was at that time. And then I kind of got snapped into actual reality and was like, I could like lose my life if I don't get help. And I could like really not have football anymore, and I could not have friends, and I could like allow myself to get into this really dark spot. And I think that I was still in the frame of mind at that time where it was controlling my life, but there were still the glimpses of like me that I could like kind of like seep through a little bit, where I wasn't completely like in a different, because I know this sounds funny, but you get into like this really distorted reality where it's like, my mum could look at me and be like, Chelsea, you look really sick. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, I'm fine. And we've had that conversation before. And yeah, and I think that really pushed me to like go to mum and dad. Well, I want to get better because I still have a goal in life and I still don't want to waste my life like not being me or not being 100%. Because it's like for a long time, like I lost my spark and I lost who I was as a person. And it's taken me probably since starting recovery to find her again. And it even has been to the point where even the past 2 years, I've still grown so much more as a person because recovery isn't like a one set, like, oh, I did recovery once when I was 17 and woohoo, I'm better. Yeah. Like it's kind of like not like a lifelong thing, but I think it can be because of the fact that, your life changes and seasons change and, you go through stressful periods, you don't go through stressful periods. It can really like pop up every like now and again, like the thoughts and the feelings. And I think it's almost like your brain's default setting sometimes. And you actually have to work quite hard to keep yourself in check sometimes and to keep yourself like, no, that's the wrong thing to think and that's the wrong thing to say and that's the wrong thing to feel.
I was going to ask, I was like, does the ED, does it stay with you? Like, is this something that you're continually working on, or is it a matter of like, I have gone through this tricky time, I'm aware of it, I have all these techniques, and I do want to talk about the techniques before we finish up because I'm conscious of time. But is it something that stays with you?
I think it stays with you for an extent. Like it, will always, sometimes it might just be like, I'm really stressed and it's, my response might be to not eat or, I might have eaten something and then, that little voice in the back of your head just is like, oh, should you have eaten that? Like, but I think you learn how to live and you learn how to be like, that's actually not me.
Yeah.
That's not what I think. That's not how I feel. That's not the kind of person that I want to be. And I'm not going to allow that to like come back into my life. And I do think that like you get better at managing it, but you also get better at like picking it up. Like you go, that's not me. That's not what I feel. That's definitely not what I think.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to allow like those thoughts to be like, that's my thought. Like that's how I think. I remember the biggest advice that my psychologist gave to me when I first went into eating disorder recovery was you need to think of it as like a separate entity trying to invade your mind. So she was like, give it a name.
Love this.
And my mum and I are obsessed with Gossip Girl. And we do like our once a year Gossip Girl rerun. And so we decide like the Gossip Girl girlies will know. We decided to name her Regina.
Yeah.
Like, no, oh my God. It's Georgina.
Georgina.
Yep, Georgina from Gossip Girl. And because she was like the one like bad character and we like hated her so much.
Yeah.
So when I would start to kind of say things that weren't like thing or getting into like the kind of like bad habits that would like kind of come out, in like, because it's a weird thing because like my mum can almost tell when I'm talking and tell when I'm not in like a good headspace to when like my eating disorder is kind of like taking over at that time. And she goes, Georgina needs to go away. Like she needs to leave. Like you're letting her talk right now. Like it was probably the biggest thing because it no longer goes my fault. Like I no longer felt that it was my fault. It was like, this is something else. This is someone else and this is not me. And I think that's the best thing that I could have taken out of it was like, I no longer felt that it was me. I no longer put all the blame on me. I no longer thought that I was the issue.
I think that's such a great technique. That is such a great thing to know. And even like that, because when we have these conversations, I always think like, what's a really good like takeaway thing for people who are listening, who might be going through similar situations to really take out of it. And from what I'm hearing, it's talking to your GP or talking to someone in that specialty, giving it a name and knowing that our mind is constantly playing tricks on us, and to be able to separate the two from like your like real self on who you really are and who you want to be versus Georgina.
Yeah.
Georgina, who is that person who is involved with ego and hatred and negative self-talk, and you can actually separate the two. And I love that. Is there anything else that you think was really helpful for you during that time?
I just think for me it was being able to like lean on the people that like meant the most to me. And I know that's actually really hard, and I've had girls message me being like, I'm going through something hard. I don't know how to tell my parents. I don't know how to tell my friends. And a part of me, you know, I'm obviously very lucky that I have the people around me that I do that have always been supportive and open. And I think for me, it's like, even if it's not family, like try to lean on someone, like try to lean on people, try to, you know, start to feel comfortable, like opening up a little bit more or trying to reach out for help. Because I found out since I started speaking about my eating disorder more publicly, the less power it has over me.
100%. I love that.
And I think when I decided to start speaking up about my eating disorder publicly, it actually pushed me further into recovery and actually pushed me further along, because I was like, it's no longer a secret. I no longer have to like be like tiptoe around the subject or like lie to people why I left Sydney or why I left school and why I had to move from Sydney to Melbourne or why I felt the way that I did, or, you know, why did you lose so much weight at that time, or why, you know, I would get sometimes really awkward and uncomfortable on away trips because the food thing freaked me out. Like I didn't have to lie about that anymore. I didn't have to, it still was a secret in my life that only a few people knew about. And as soon as I let go of that and as soon as I started sharing my journey and as soon as I started speaking about it, it was like all that like went away. And if I felt uncomfortable, I was like, yeah, I feel uncomfortable right now because the food thing's freaking me out.
Wow, that's so cool. I feel like that's such an important piece, but also the ability to help other people. I imagine that probably helps the recovery process. I know people who are in AA, something similar, like a big part of their recovery is sharing their story and then helping somebody else.
Yeah. It's been really interesting, actually. Like, I get that kind of like, oh, should I post? Like, do I post it? Do I not? Like, do people gonna resonate with it? Like, I don't know. But like the past few like Raw games, I've had young girls come up to me saying like, we watched your TikToks, we watched your video. Like, it actually has helped me so much. And I went and spoke to my family, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I wanted it to have that impact. And I think when you share something like this, that's what the impact you want to have. But when I was like seeing girls come up to me and saying like, you know, this has helped me so much, and they're only like 14, 15 years old, I was like, oh my God, like I did not realize that people were watching it or that this was like helping other people. And I think that's also like what helps keep me like in check or want to keep pushing for recovery to the point where I'm like, yeah, I'm sweet always.
I think it's so great, honestly. And I think that's why I have so much respect for you, because you're willing to have these conversations, and the compounding effect of these conversations are going to be huge. Like, I already know you're doing so much. Like, you're doing a lot with like ED Queensland, and I can see that, and I see that you're passionate about it. And I know that people who are passionate about these types of things, they usually have like a lived experience with it. So, Chelsea, honestly, thank you so much for this conversation. Like, I think it's, I'm so glad we did it. I'm so glad we sat down. Before we do finish up, I do have a little thank you. Just from a couple of our partners, Lululemon especially, and Whoop. I actually don't have a card for you, so I wrote on one of my study cards.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Oh, my little... like my Whoop band is getting a bit gross and crusty, so thank you so much.
I did see your Whoop band there, so you'll have 12 months on that as well. So you can pass that on to a friend. There's another band if you do want to steal the band. I've actually got a heap of spare bands in my room if you want another pretty color. But yeah, I don't have a card, so I used one of my study notes.
You know what?
Today.
It's even better because the pink is what really gets me.
And then you also have a heap of kit on that Lululemon voucher as well.
Thank you so much.
We love Lulu. Hey, no, thank you.
I love Lululemon. If you're watching,
yeah, if they're listening. Honestly, my whole kit's Lulu. Like I roll.
The best.
They're an amazing partner. I'm so grateful to have them on board, and they love like doing this stuff in the mental health space. And obviously, a lot of the girls and the boys who come on, they love getting some Lulu kits. So you'll have a heap of stuff there. But like I said, like I've said it before, but honestly, thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me. I'm so glad we got to do this finally.
Beautiful. Thanks, Chelsea.
Thank you.